Hello everyone, thank you for joining me and welcome to today's edition of the Daf Yomi Masechet Tractate Menachot Daf 74 Amud A. So just to finish off from the last Amud, therefore the verse states, and it shall be the priest as a meal offering. In this way the verse compares the priest's obligatory offering to his voluntary offering. Just as his voluntary offering is not eaten, so too the obligatory offering is not eaten. In disagreement with the previous interpretation, Rav Shimon said, it is stated, and it shall be the priest as a meal offering, but it states only as the meal offering, referring to the meal offering of a non-priest. Rather, this verse serves to compare and render the halacha of a meal offering of a sinner brought by one of the priests as equivalent to the status of a meal offering of a sinner brought by an Israelite. Just with regard to the meal offering of a sinner brought by an Israelite, a handful is removed, so too with regard to the meal offering of a sinner brought by one of the priests, a handful is removed. The Brisa challenges this. If so, then say as follows: just as with regard to the meal offering of a sinner brought by an Israelite, a handful is removed and the remainder is eaten, so too with regard to the meal offering of a sinner brought by one of the priests, a handful should be removed and the remainder eaten. Therefore, the verse states, and the remainder shall be the priest as a meal offering, which is interpreted to mean that with regard to the rite performed by the priest, the meal offering is like the meal offering of an Israelite, but it is not like the meal offering of the Israelite in regard to consumption by the fires of the altar. How is this possible? In what way does the meal offering of a priest resemble that of an Israelite in some respects, not in others? The priest's handful is sacrificed by itself, like that of an Israelite, and the remainder is sacrificed by itself, unlike those of an Israelite, which are eaten. According to the opinion of the first Tana in the Brisa cited earlier, a priest may perform the rites of the meal offering of a sinner that he brings for himself based on the birth, and the remainder shall be the priest as a meal offering. The Gemara now asks, with regard to this halacha, that its rite is valid when performed by him, is it derived from here? It is derived from there. Another verse cited in a Brisa, which states, from where is it derived with regard to a priest that he may come and sacrifice his offerings at any time and at any hour that he desires? Kohen sheba umakav kabbono sov b'chol eis v'yitzeh. With regard to a priest who has an offering to bring, he may offer it himself on any day he chooses, even with regard to his sin offering or guilt offering. He may perform the rite and achieve his atonement as stated in the Brisa of Sefer Voda Hilchikli Hamikdash 4:7, even when it is not during the period of his priestly watch. The verse states, and if a Levite comes from any of your gates from all of Israel, where he lives, and comes with all the desire of his soul to the place which the Lord shall choose, then he shall serve in the name of the Lord his God. All his brothers, the Levites, do, who stand there before the Lord, in Deuteronomy 18:6-7. The Gemara answers, if the halacha was right from there, the verse in Deuteronomy, I would say this statement that a priest may perform his rites wherever he chooses applies only to a matter that does not come to atone for a sin, and the verse is referring to an offering that he desires to bring. With regard to a matter that comes to atone for a sin, I would say that he may not perform the rite himself. Therefore, the halacha of the meal offering of a sinner must be derived from the verse in Leviticus, and the remainder shall be the priest as a meal offering. The Gemara asks, and is this halacha that a priest may perform the rite of his own sin offering also derived from here, i.e. the verse, and the remainder shall be the priest as a meal offering? It is derived from there, and the priest shall effect atonement for the soul that sins unwittingly, when he sins unwittingly, Numbers 15:28. The term for the soul that sins unwittingly teaches that the priest may effect atonement even through himself when he performs the rite. The early commentators discuss how this derivation is to be understood. Some explain that the derivation is from the general term, the soul that sins, which teaches that atonement can be effected for the sin of any soul through the priest's service, including the soul of that priest himself. Rashi Rabbeinu Girshim Hagola. Others explain that the derivation is based on a superfluous phrase in the verse. Once the verse states that the soul that sins, the next clause which states when he sins unwittingly is not needed, and it serves as the source for this halacha. Rashi manuscript, see Meshech Chachma, sorry. When he performs the rite. The Gemara answers, if the halacha were derived from that latter verse, I would say, have I said that bit? No. This statement permitting him to effect his own atonement applies when the offering is brought for a sin committed unwittingly. With regard to an offering brought for a sin committed unintentionally, the priest may not effect his own atonement. Therefore, the verse that states, "And the remainder shall be the priest," as the meal offering teaches us. Later commentaries explain that although this priest sinned willfully, he is not disqualified for performing the sacrificial rites. This is because, as evident from the Gemara's conclusion, he is no longer disqualified once he has repented and brought an offering to atone for his sin, and that's from the Netivat HaKodesh. And the priest may perform the rite even for an offering that he brings for an intentional sin. The Gemara clarifies, with regard to an offering brought for a sin committed intentionally, how can you find these circumstances? The Gemara answers, you find them in the instance of a meal offering brought as an atonement for intentionally taking a false oath of testimony that he was not aware of a certain incident involving another individual. The priest may perform the rites for a meal offering that he brings to atone for such a sin. With regard to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that a handful of the meal offering of a sinner brought by a priest is separated and offered upon the altar, it is taught in another bite that Rabbi Shimon says, with regard to a meal offering of a sinner brought by one of the priests, a handful is removed, and a handful is sacrificed by itself, and the remainder is sacrificed by itself. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, says, the handful is sacrificed by itself, and the remainder is scattered upon the place of the ashes. So what's the footnote? V'hashirayim mispazrin. The early commentators disagree as to the explanation of the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon. According to some commentaries, the remainder was scattered over the place of the ashes next to the altar, where all the ashes from upon the altar were removed daily. As there was no fire there, the remainder was left there without being burnt. And it's Rashi here on Yevamot 100a. Others explain that the remainder must be burned. Therefore, he must be referring to an alternative place of the ashes, where disqualified offerings of the most sacred order were burned by fire. So it's here on Yevamot 100a. And the footnote upon the place of the ashes. Beis Hadeshen. The place of the ashes is a general term for the location of the ashes from the altar and from the candelabrum were placed, and sacrificial meat that required burning was burned. There was two such locations in the temple courtyard. One was to the east of the ramp leading to the altar, on the southern side of the altar. This is where the ashes from the outer altar, as well as the ashes of the inner altar and the ashes of the candelabrum and the crop and feathers of burnt offerings were removed. This location is described in the Torah as the place of the ashes in Leviticus 1:16. The second place to the east of the altar was used for the burning of disqualified sacrificial meat. Aside from these two locations within the temple courtyard, there were two additional locations known as the place of the ashes that were used for burning. One location on the Temple Mount was designated for the burning of bulls and goats that became disqualified after sprinkling of their blood, or according to an opposing opinion, that became disqualified after leaving the courtyard, the Vacham 104b. The other site, located outside Jerusalem, was designated for the burning of bulls and goats, whose designated rite was to be burned. In addition, ashes from the external altar were brought there periodically. And there's pictures here. Okay. With regard to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, a third generation and more of Eretz Yisrael, he is known as Rabbi Chia in the Jerusalem Talmud. Rabbi Chia bar Abba came from Babylon to Eretz Yisrael, where he studied under Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Most of his learning took place in the academy of Rabbi Yochanan. Each month he would review his learning in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia reported many statements he heard from his teachers, as well as those he had heard from Reish Lakish, whose son Rabbi Chia taught. And Rabbi Elazar, and from Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Chia bar Abba would lecture on topics of halach in several places. Rabbi Chia bar Abba struggled to earn a living, and although he was a priest, he refused to accept the tithe and priestly gifts that were offered to him. Once he left Eretz Yisrael for financial reasons. For this purpose, he asked Rabbi Elazar to recommend him to Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya II, so that he would provide him an endorsement that he could present to Babylonian Jewry. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya II wrote, "We have sent you a great man who is our emissary and is comparable to us. Evidently, Rabbi Chia remained in Babylonia for an extended period, as there are records of his exchange with Rabbi Nachman and with Rabbah, a 4th generation Amorah in Babylonia. And Rabbi Yochanan discusses it and asks, to which place of the ashes in the temple is he referring? If he's referring to the one that is above upon the altar, his opinion is identical to that of his father Rabbi Shimon, who stated that the remainder is offered and burned upon the altar, after which the ashes are swept onto the ash heap upon the altar. If so, according to both opinions, the remainder is taken to the same place. And if Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, is referring to the ash heap that is below the altar, that is difficult. Do you have any item that is sacrificed below the altar? Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba was a Moab Babylonian Eretz Yisrael in the 3rd generation of Amoraim there. Rabbi Abba, who is also called Rabbi Ba or Rabbi Va in the Jerusalem Talmud, was a preeminent disciple of Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda. He may have even seen Rab and Shmuel in his youth. In Eretz Yisrael, he became a disciple of the most foremost students of Rabbi Yochanan, and he was counted among the leading sages in Eretz Yisrael, such that he is referred to as our teacher in Eretz Yisrael. Although it seems that he himself never served as the head of the yeshiva, he taught innumerable students. Many recount his statements in both the Babylonian Talmud and in the Jerusalem Talmud. Rabbi Abba owned a great deal of property, and his business interests demanded that he travel to Babylonia and other places. The Talmud records many stories about his generosity and the respectful manner in which he provided for the poor. Rabbi Abba lived a long life, and he was still alive in the time of Rava, in the 4th generation of the Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael, said to Rabbi Chia Abba. Perhaps Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, meant that the remainder is scattered there to be wasted. When the sages heard this, they laughed at him, saying, "But do you have any item that is sacrificed as part of the temple service in order to be wasted?" Later commentaries note that certain offerings, including some bulls and goats, are not meant to be burned ab initio. Therefore, the Gemara's question is to be understood as this: once the verse indicates that the offering should be sacrificed whole, how could it be handled in a way other than to offer it on the altar and carry it over? The Gemara answers that there are consecrated items that are intentionally wasted. With regard to such items, the father of Rabbi Avin teaches, Rashi offers 2 possible explanations for the statement of the father of Rabbi Avin. According to this first explanation, the statement of the father of Rabbi Avin is presented as an independent statement and not as an answer to the question. But do you have any item that is sacrificed as part of the temple service in order to be wasted? According to Rashi's second explanation, the statement of the father of Rabbi Avin is an answer to the question, according to which the verse dictates that the priest's meal offering of a sinner is likened to his gift offering, in that neither one is eaten, but in another respect they are not alike. The remainder of the priest's sinner's meal offering is scattered over the ash heap, and every meal offering of the priest shall be offered in its entirety; it shall not be eaten. Leviticus 6:16. Why must this verse, which offers those discussing the high priest's daily griddle cake offering, say that it should not be eaten, after it already states that it is entirely offered? The verse teaches, "I have likened the meal offering of a sinner brought by a priest to the daily griddle cake offering brought by the high priest with regard to eating, insofar as it is not eaten, but I have not likened it with regard to another matter." Early commentators disagree as to how this is to be understood. Some explain that the priest's meal offering of a sinner is likened to a priest's gift offering, as both offerings are referenced in the verse in question, says Rashi. According to another interpretation, the priest's meal offering of the sinner is likened to the high priest's daily griddle cake offering mentioned in the same passage in the Torah immediately before this verse. Rashi manuscript Tosfot the Ben Gershon Hagolah. As a corollary, the commentaries also discuss the meaning of the succeeding question in the Gemara. What is he saying? According to Rashi, this question is to be understood: how can one learn about the priest's obligatory or voluntary meal offerings from this verse? By contrast, the other opinions understand the question to be: what is the proof that the comparison is with regard to eating alone? Once the verse states explicitly that the offering is to be consumed entirely on the fire. Therefore, according to the answer, the instruction that the offering must be entirely offered is understood as pertaining to a gift offering, i.e. the meal offering of a sinner is not burned in the manner of a griddle cake offering. The Gemara asks, what is he saying? As the verse states explicitly that it must be entirely offered, Abai said that this is what he is saying. This is how the verse is to be read. Every meal offering of the priest shall not be eaten when the offering is sacrificed to fulfill its obligation, such as the meal offering of a sinner. It is neither eaten nor entire nor completely burned, but rather placed on the ash heap. When the verse states shall be offered in its entirety, this is referring to his gift offering, which is completely burned in the manner of a griddle cake offering. Rather said to him, this reading is like a sharp knife cutting the verses to pieces, as it interprets the beginning and the end of the verse together, ignoring the middle. Rather says, when the verse states every meal offering of the priest shall be offered in its entirety, this is referring to his gift offering, which is entirely offered. When the verse states that it shall not be eaten, this is referring to the obligatory meal offering, which is neither eaten nor entirely offered. The Gemara asks, but why should the verse be read that way? I can reverse the apuch honor. According to some, the Gemara asks this question to both Abai and Rav in Tosfot. According to others, this question applies only to the explanation of Rabbah commentary attributed to the Rashba. The interpretation and say that the priest's obligatory meal offering is entirely offered, and this gift offering shall neither be eaten nor entirely offered. The Gemara answers, it stands to reason that his gift offering should be included in the phrase shall be offered in its entirety, as it resembles a griddle cake offering and differs from the meal offering of a sinner in several respects, namely that it is frequent, that the priest bringing it did not sin, and that its scent is fragrant, as it is mixed with oil and frankincense is added to it. The Gemara asks, on the contrary, the verse should be interpreted to include the obligatory meal offering, as the obligatory meal offering is similar to the griddle cake offering in that, unlike the gift offering, it comprises a tenth of an ephah, and bringing it is an obligation. The Gemara responds, because these similarities between the gift offering and the griddle cake offering are more numerous than those between the obligatory offering and the griddle cake offering, it is logical that the verse is comparing the gift offering to the griddle cake offering. After discussing the opinions of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Shimon, the Gemara asks, and after the opinion of the rabbis, that no handful is removed from any of the meal offerings of the priest with regard to this verse, and every meal offering of the priest shall be offered in its entirety, it shall not be eaten. As what do they do with it? The Gemara asks this question in response to the opinion of the rabbis, but it does not specify which rabbis it addresses. Some say that the Gemara here is returning to its discussion of Rabbi Shimon's opinion that the rite of the priest's meal offering of a sinner requires the removal of a handful, and both the handful and the remainder are burnt on the altar. According to this understanding, the Gemara is asking what the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Shimon derive from the verse that states, and every meal offering of the priest, says Rashi. Others explain that the Gemara is referring to the rabbis who disagree with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, who holds that a handful is removed from the priest's meal offering of a sinner, and only it is burned on the altar, as explained previously. According to this interpretation, the rabbis mentioned here include both Rabbi Shimon and the unnamed first Tana of the Mishnah and Tosfot, the Beit Gershon Mo HaGola. And how do they interpret the superfluous phrase, it shall not be eaten? The Gemara answers, they require it for that which is taught in the Braita. Concerning the griddle cake offering, the verse states, it shall be entirely smoked for the Lord, Leviticus 6:15. From this verse and the verse that follows it, which states, and every meal offering of the priest shall be offered in its entirety, it shall not be eaten. I have derived only that the griddle cake offering mentioned above in the first verse is subject to, it shall be entirely smoked, and that other meal offerings of the priest mentioned below in the second verse are subject to, it shall not be eaten. From where is it derived to apply the prohibition that was said about this case to that case, and the prohibition that was said about that case to this case? To teach that the priest's meal offering shall be entirely smoked, and the griddle cake offering shall not be eaten. The verse states entirely in the first verse and entirely in the second, to be utilized as a verbal analogy, as is stated here with regard to the priest's meal offering entirely, as is stated there with regard to the griddle cake offering entirely. Just as there, the offering is subject to the prohibition of it shall be entirely smoked, so to here the offerings are subject to the prohibition of it shall be entirely smoked. And just as here with regard to the meal offering of the priest, the verse serves to impose a prohibition upon eating it. So too there, with regard to the griddle cake offering, the verse serves to impose a prohibition upon eating it. With regard to the prohibition against eating from certain offerings derived from the verse that states, shall be offered in its entirety, it shall not be eaten. Being asked in the case of a priest who ate from the sacrificial portions, the Rabbeinu statement does not specify which sacrificial portions are being discussed. According to some early commentaries, the priest in question ate from the diaphragm and the kidneys. Rashi manuscript. In any event, the question certainly does not refer to forbidden fast, as one who eats those are liable to receive kaveh. Rabbeinu was halacha as to whether this priest violates the prohibition of a non-priest eating certain types of sacrificial meat. What does that mean? The early commentators discuss the nature of this prohibition. According to Rashi, the Gemara is referring to the prohibition stated in the verse, no non-priest shall eat of the sacred, Leviticus 22:10. Some challenge the interpretation because that verse speaks of consuming teruma. Rather, they suggest that the Gemara speaks of the prohibition derived from the verse written with regard to the 7 days of the inauguration to the tabernacle service, and Aaron and his sons shall eat the flesh of the ram, and they shall eat those with which atonement was made to consecrate and sanctify them, but the non-priest shall not eat of it, because they are sacred. Exodus 29:32-34. This verse teaches that there is a prohibition against partaking of offering of the most sacred order, which is applicable to whoever is not a priest, for whom it is permitted to eat them. Tosfot. Expressed in the verse, no non-priest shall eat the sacrificial meat, Leviticus 22:10. Thank you for listening, and wish you all the best. Bye.